I love this question. It shows all remote jobs are not created equal, and I know that you don't have a high quality programming role because this stuff is standard in programming. So I'll show you 4 techniques that engineers use to de-escalate and mitigate emergencies. And then hopefully this will also persuade you that maybe you should be looking into a programming role instead of whatever remote role you have right now. So the short answer to what would I do if an emergency occurs at 11 a.m. is I would do the same thing that I would do if an emergency occurs at 7 p.m. when I'm not working. So we can basically treat like the whole day as if I'm not working from an emergency perspective because it follows the same processes. Engineers use 4 processes. These are on-call rotation, an urgency matrix, a well-groomed calendar, and an intake process. If you have these 4 policies in place at your company, and by the way, the majority of engineering jobs will have these in place, even small companies. If you have these in place, you don't need to worry about emergencies. You're basically like immune to emergencies. So what is an on-call rotation? For any team of programmers, there will be an engineer who's on call. Sometimes there will be a secondary, like a backup, if the on-call can't be reached. And the way this works is if an emergency triggers, that person handles it. And this is not 24/7 every day of the year. There are rotations so that most of the team is free most of the time. Typical engineering sizes would be 5 to 10 engineers, sometimes more. And only one of those people does have to deal with these emergencies like 24/7. So we love our on-call engineers, and they do that temporarily and it rotates through the team. This means that most of the time, almost all the engineers are free. The urgency matrix helps determine the priority of treatment of issues that the on-call engineer will face. So most of the time when someone gives you a request, you may know this even if you're not an engineer, they may call it an emergency, but it's very often not really an emergency. So this is why it's really important to have clear criteria for what counts as something that needs to be dealt with immediately, even if it's 1 in the morning, or if it's something that we can wait till tomorrow, or if it's something that we can wait till next week or next month. So these are called urgency matrices. You might also hear the term like an Eisenhower matrix. Sometimes it's called like escalation criteria or prioritization criteria, something like this. But it's the same general idea. If a production server goes down and like hundreds of users can't use your website, it needs to get fixed now. If it's something like someone found a typo, we can deal with that tomorrow or even next week. Besides these emergencies that have to do with systems going down and people being impacted, sometimes in some jobs, it'll be called an emergency when someone just wants to have an impromptu meeting. This is where having a well-groomed calendar comes into place. People can see my calendar and I can block time to take care of errands or to just focus and have deep work. This is actually a really, really good practice, and it's encouraged in mature programming companies. As a matter of culture, and sometimes as a matter of policy, if you want to have a meeting with someone, you put it on their calendar. And so you won't have an emergency meeting that pops up like someone just calls you and wants to have a meeting right now. That's like a sign of a toxic culture. And it's actually pretty uncommon in programming. What you will often have is someone throw a meeting on your calendar, and if your calendar is properly groomed and blocked, they will throw it on in a spot where you'll be available for that meeting. Another useful concept here is core hours, where most of the team is expected to be online at a certain time of day, and ceremony meetings, where most of the problems that come up, you deal with them ahead of time because you have regularly scheduled meetings for different purposes. And when I say ceremony there, I'm specifically referring to agile ceremonies like stand-up, planning, grooming, and so on, retro. So in software engineering, we have a standard way of working called agile. Not every company uses this, but I think coverage is like more than 90% of companies are going to use agile. You will also see edge cases where a team doesn't even have a remote like on-call rotation at all because they just don't have emergencies on that team. So this is a different kind of exception, which is actually like a positive exception, and it doesn't create an issue for running errands in the middle of the day, say. Teams that don't really try to follow agile will still often pick and choose particular agile ceremonies, including the daily stand-up meeting, which still achieves this effect of preempting most of the issues you're going to face because you're like talking to your team. And so like if you need to run errands, you just tell them. And the last one is an intake policy. And this is where actually many companies do fall down, is that they don't have a very good intake policy. But if someone wants to give you work as an emergency, if it's not really an emergency according to your on-call criteria, it's not that they want to have a meeting right now, it's just that they want you to go do something like right now, and they're like cracking a whip on you. First of all, that's a toxic work culture and you might want to get a different job. But second of all, if you have a well-documented intake policy, particularly if you're following Agile, you can pair these together and you can say, we would love to work on this. According to our intake policy, we're treating this with high priority, and here's the next spot where that will get worked, and who's the person who's going to work on it. So they don't literally like expect you to do it right now. There will be a shared expectation based on your intake policy that it will be worked on with urgency according to our intake policy. And then you just construct the intake policy such that you can still do errands in the middle of the day if you need to. Like, if you request my team work on something today, in the best case, I'll start tomorrow. Like, I'm not literally starting right now. And here I am doing another errand, taking my dog outside. So I hope that gave you an indication about how you can have a better work-life balance as a remote worker, and in particular, why you might be attracted to a role in programming where we have a lot of these like workflow processes set up so that you don't have to like panic all the time. Like, let's lower the stress level. Hope that helps. Follow for more.